The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed softly in the dimly lit hospital room. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the faint, lingering fragrance of expensive perfume, a reminder of the life she once lived. She lay there, motionless, her chest rising and falling in a slow, mechanical rhythm. 4 months, she had been trapped in this state, lost somewhere between life and death. Dr. Ethan Carter stood beside her bed, adjusting the fresh bandages on her arm. He had done this 100 times before, but today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the moonlight slipped through the blinds, casting long shadows across the pristine white sheets. Or perhaps it was the strange, almost electric feeling that tingled at his fingertips as he carefully wrapped the gauze. He shook his head, brushing off the unease. It was just another night, just another patient. She wasn't just any patient, though. Victoria Hayes, a name whispered in the corridors with a mix of admiration and mystery. A self-made millionaire, a woman of elegance and power, now reduced to silence. The world outside still spoke of her in hushed tones, speculating about the accident that had left her in this condition. Some called it fate. Others weren't so sure. Ethan had never met her before she slipped into this endless sleep, but over time, he had come to know the details of her life. Her business empire, the controversies, the rumors. He had seen her photographs in magazines, always exuding confidence, always in control. But here, in this room, she was fragile, vulnerable, a ghost of the woman the world once knew. As he secured the final bandage, a shiver ran down his spine. The room suddenly felt charged, as if the very air had thickened. He glanced at her face, studying the delicate features frozen in time. Then, it happened. A sharp intake of breath. Ethan's hands froze. His heart pounded against his ribs. And then her fingers twitched. His mind raced, questioning if he had imagined it. But before he could react, her lips parted, and a weak, raspy whisper slipped through. One word. His name. Ethan. His breath caught in his throat. He had never spoken to her before. He had never introduced himself. So how did she know his name? Ethan felt his entire body tense as the weight of the moment sank in. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out the rhythmic beeping of the machines. He told himself he must have imagined it. It had to be his mind playing tricks on him. After all, Victoria Hayes had been in a coma for months. No one had expected her to wake up. And yet she had spoken. His name. He swallowed hard and leaned in slightly, watching her face for any further movement. Her eyelids twitched, her fingers curled weakly against the crisp sheets. He hesitated before carefully placing his hand over hers, feeling the slight warmth of her skin. "Miss Hayes." His voice came out quieter than he intended, laced with uncertainty. No response. The stillness returned, thick and suffocating. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe the exhaustion was getting to him. He had been working long shifts, barely catching a few hours of sleep in between. His mind was bound to slip at some point. But no matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted in that room. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, trying to clear his thoughts. The last thing he wanted was to sound foolish, waking up the entire hospital over something he wasn't even sure had happened. If she had truly spoken, if she had really woken up, then it would happen again. Ethan took a step back, glancing at the monitors. Her vitals looked the same, steady, unchanged. But that didn't mean nothing had happened. The body was unpredictable, and so was the mind. If she was regaining consciousness, it could come in waves, small moments of awareness before slipping back under. Still, there was one thing he couldn't explain. How did she know his name? He had never met Victoria Hayes before she was in this hospital bed. He wasn't even assigned to her case initially. He had only started treating her when one of his colleagues had gone on leave. There was no reason for her to know him. No reason at all. A sense of unease settled deep in his chest. He needed answers. but none were coming. For a long moment, he stood there, waiting, watching. But Victoria remained motionless, her breathing soft and steady. The moment, whatever it had been, was over. Shaking his head, he finally turned away, making a mental note to check in on her again soon. Maybe he'd review her case files once more, look for anything that could explain what had just happened. He walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck, like someone was watching him. He turned his head slightly, glancing down the long corridor. The hospital was quiet at this hour, the usual hum of activity reduced to the occasional beep of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses making their rounds. Nothing seemed out of place. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling. Pushing it aside, he made his way toward the staff lounge, trying to refocus his thoughts. He needed coffee, something strong enough to clear his head. As he poured himself a cup, his mind kept drifting back to Victoria Hayes. The accident that put her in a coma had been all over the news. A car crash. Violent, nearly fatal. She had been found unconscious at the scene, her luxury sedan crumpled beyond recognition. But there had been whispers, speculation that it wasn't just an accident. Some claimed it had been deliberate. Others believed there was more to the story than what the reports had said. He had never given it much thought before. Patients came in with tragic stories all the time, but his job wasn't to investigate, it was to treat. And yet, after tonight, he couldn't ignore the nagging questions that lingered in his mind. A sudden buzz in his pocket made him jolt. He pulled out his phone, frowning when he saw the unknown number flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice cautious. Silence. A strange, static-like noise crackled through the line, followed by a faint, shallow breath. Then, a whisper. "Be careful." Ethan's blood ran cold. The call disconnected before he could respond. Ethan stared at his phone, his grip tightening as his mind raced. The voice had been barely more than a whisper, but it was clear. Direct. Someone was warning him. But who? And why? His first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but something deep inside told him this was different. It felt real. He swallowed hard, trying to push away the unsettling feeling creeping through him. He needed to focus. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone had dialed the wrong number, or it was some kind of hospital-related call that didn't make sense out of context. But the way his name had been spoken earlier by Victoria, the way the voice on the phone had sounded so deliberate, none of it sat right with him. His coffee now forgotten, he turned on his heel and made his way back toward the patient records. If he wanted answers, he had to start somewhere. He pulled up Victoria Hayes' file, scanning through the details again, looking for anything that stood out. The accident report was straightforward. She had been found unconscious in her car late at night. No witnesses, no sign of another vehicle involved. But the deeper he read, the more something felt off. Her injuries had been severe, but there was a note in the file from one of the first responders that caught his eye. Patient found with minor abrasions on wrists, inconsistent with crash impact. Ethan frowned. Why hadn't he noticed this before? It wasn't a detail that would typically raise alarms, but given everything that had happened tonight, it nagged at him. If those marks weren't from the crash, what were they from? A quiet shuffle outside the office made him freeze. He glanced toward the door, his pulse quickening. The hallway was mostly empty at this hour, only the occasional nurse passing by. But for a split second, he could have sworn he saw someone standing just beyond the doorway, lingering, watching. When he stepped out, the corridor was empty. The feeling of being watched hadn't left him, though. It clung to him like an invisible weight, making every step feel heavier. He rubbed his temple, trying to push past the paranoia creeping in. Maybe he was just overthinking everything. Maybe he was letting his exhaustion and the strange events of the night get to him. But then, Victoria Hayes woke up. It happened in the early morning hours, long after Ethan had forced himself to get some rest in the on-call room. A nurse's frantic voice over the hospital intercom jolted him awake. Code Blue. Patient Hayes, room 217. Ethan shot up, his heart pounding. He didn't waste a second, racing down the hall toward her room. When he pushed through the door, he expected chaos. Machines beeping wildly, nurses scrambling. But instead, there was only silence. Victoria was awake. She was sitting up slightly, her eyes scanning the room, her expression filled with something between confusion and fear. The nurse beside her was frozen, holding a chart against her chest as if unsure what to do next. Ethan stepped forward cautiously. "Miss Hayes." Her eyes snapped to his, locking onto him with an intensity that sent a chill through him. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, her lips parted. "You were there." His breath caught in his throat. "What?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I saw you." He shook his head slightly, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Victoria, you've been in a coma for months. We've never met before." A flicker of something, panic, crossed her face. She exhaled sharply, gripping the hospital blanket with trembling fingers. "No, no, I remember you. I remember your voice." Her breathing grew uneven, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something that wasn't there. "I heard you. Every night. You were talking to me." Ethan felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He had spoken to her before, only briefly, when he checked her vitals, when he changed her bandages, simple words meant to fill the silence. He had never thought she could actually hear him. Before he could respond, she suddenly grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Someone tried to kill me," she whispered. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His first instinct was to ask if she was sure, if maybe it was a fragment of a dream, a distortion of reality after months of unconsciousness. But the look in her eyes told him she knew exactly what she was saying. Ethan glanced at the nurse, who looked just as stunned. The room felt too small, the air thick with tension. "Do you remember what happened?" he asked carefully. Victoria swallowed, her fingers still curled around his wrist. "Not everything, but I remember pieces. I remember being in the car. I remember someone else there with me. And then," her breath hitched, "the crash wasn't an accident." Ethan's mind spun with possibilities. If she was right, if someone had intentionally tried to harm her, then whoever was responsible might still be out there, watching, waiting. And if she had really been hearing him while in the coma, then there was something else to consider. Who else had she heard? Ethan could feel his heartbeat pounding in his ears as Victoria's words sank in. Someone had tried to kill her. The weight of that revelation made the air in the room feel heavier, pressing down on him. He had treated many patients before, had seen tragedies unfold in this very hospital, but this was different. This wasn't just an accident or an unfortunate event. This was something deliberate. And the worst part? Whoever had done it could still be out there. Victoria's grip on his wrist tightened. There was desperation in her eyes, a silent plea for him to believe her. He didn't need convincing. Every instinct in his body told him she was telling the truth. But there were so many questions, so many gaps in her memory that needed filling. "Victoria," he said, keeping his voice calm, "we need to take this one step at a time. You said you remember someone being in the car with you. Do you remember their face? Their voice?" She exhaled shakily, her brows drawing together as she struggled to recall. "It's blurry. I remember feeling afraid. I remember arguing, voices raised. And then there was darkness." Her fingers twitched slightly against his skin. "But there was something else. Something I kept hearing while I was unconscious. A voice." Ethan felt his breath catch. "A voice?" She nodded slowly. "Not just yours. Someone else's. Someone I don't recognize." Her eyes darkened with fear. They whispered things. Like they were watching me. Like they were waiting for me to never wake up. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. If she had been hearing things while in her coma, that meant someone had been near her. Someone who didn't want her to survive. Before he could respond, the door to the hospital room creaked open, and a shadow loomed in the doorway. Ethan turned sharply, his muscles tensing. A man in a dark suit stood there, his face unreadable. His presence was imposing, his stance too controlled, too calculated. "Miss Hayes," the man spoke, his voice smooth, practiced. "It's good to see you awake." Victoria stiffened immediately, her hand gripping the sheets. Ethan didn't miss the way her breath hitched, the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Recognition laced with fear. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, stepping slightly in front of her. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Henry Caldwell, Victoria's legal representative." Legal representative? Ethan didn't like the way he said it. There was no warmth, no genuine concern in his voice, just something cold and rehearsed. Victoria swallowed hard. "I never hired you." Henry's smile didn't falter. "Oh, but your estate did, Miss Hayes. In your absence, many arrangements had to be made." He took a step closer. "Now that you're awake, I'm here to ensure everything is handled properly." Ethan could feel the unease radiating from Victoria. She was gripping the sheets so tightly her knuckles were turning white. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice strained. Henry's gaze flickered toward Ethan for the briefest second before settling back on her. "Forgive me, but you've been in a coma for months. There are things that need to be discussed. Financial matters, estate management." He spoke as if she were an inconvenience rather than a person who had just come back from the brink of death. "It's important that we go over them immediately." Ethan had seen this kind of approach before, someone trying to take control while their target was still weak. He wasn't about to let that happen. "She just woke up," Ethan said firmly. "She's in no condition to have any kind of discussion right now." Henry's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something. Annoyance, perhaps. "I understand your concern, Doctor. But this is a private matter." Victoria shook her head. "No. I don't want to talk to you." Henry hesitated for only a second before nodding curtly. "Of course. We'll give you time. But don't worry, Miss Hayes. We'll be in touch very soon." The way he said it sent a chill through Ethan. With that, Henry turned and walked out of the room, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. The moment he was gone, Victoria let out a shaky breath, her body visibly trembling. Ethan could see the fear in her eyes, the way she was fighting to keep control. "Victoria," he said gently, "who was that?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know. But I've seen him before." She gripped the hospital sheets tightly. I think he was there. The night of the crash." Ethan's stomach twisted. Before he could say anything else, the hospital intercom crackled overhead, the voice of a nurse breaking through. "Dr. Carter, please report to the security desk immediately." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Security? Why?" He looked at Victoria, who was still shaken, but she met his gaze. "Go," she whispered. "Find out what's happening." Reluctantly, he nodded. "I'll be back," he promised before stepping out of the room. The moment he reached the security desk, he saw it. Grainy footage playing on a monitor. A figure in dark clothing slipping through the hospital hallways, moving toward Victoria's room. The time stamp? Less than an hour before she woke up. Ethan stared at the grainy footage, his pulse racing. The figure in dark clothing moved with purpose, their steps calculated. They weren't wandering the hospital at random, they had a destination. Victoria's room. The security officer beside him rewound the footage, playing it again, this time pausing at a frame where the figure turned slightly toward the camera. The image was blurred, but something stood out. A glimpse of a face. Not clear enough to identify, but enough to see the sharp jawline, the shadow of a hood partially obscuring their features. Ethan's stomach twisted. Whoever this was, they had been there just before Victoria woke up. And if Victoria was right, if someone had tried to kill her before, then there was a chance this person had returned to finish what they started. "We didn't see them leave," the security officer said, his voice low. "No exit footage. No sign of them after this." Ethan's eyes narrowed. That didn't make sense. The hospital had security cameras covering every major entrance and exit. If they hadn't left, they were still inside. A chill ran down his spine. "I need you to check every hallway, every stairwell," Ethan said, his voice tight. "If they're still here, we need to find them." The security officer nodded and radioed for additional staff, but Ethan wasn't willing to just stand there and wait. He turned sharply and made his way back toward Victoria's room, his mind racing. If someone had been there before she woke up, what had they done? Did they say something to her? Was there something in that moment that triggered her awakening? When he pushed open the door to her room, Victoria flinched, her eyes wide. "It's just me," he said quickly, trying to calm her. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but there was still tension in her posture. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hushed. Ethan hesitated for a brief second before deciding she had a right to know. "Someone was here before you woke up. We caught them on security footage, but we don't know who they are yet." Victoria's breath hitched, her fingers curling into the fabric of the blanket. "Then, it wasn't just a dream." His brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" She licked her lips, glancing toward the window as if expecting to see someone standing there. "Right before I woke up, I felt something. A presence. I don't remember everything clearly, but I swear I heard someone whispering to me. It wasn't your voice. It was different." Ethan clenched his jaw. The idea that someone could have been in her room, speaking to her while she was still unconscious, sent a sick feeling through him. A knock on the door made them both jump. A nurse peeked inside, looking nervous. "Dr. Carter, there's someone here asking to see Miss Hayes. They say it's urgent." Ethan exchanged a glance with Victoria before stepping out into the hallway. A woman stood near the nurse's station, her sharp features set in a determined expression. She was dressed in a tailored gray suit, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. "Dr. Carter?" she asked, her voice crisp. "That's me," he said cautiously. She pulled out a badge. "Detective Rachel Monroe. I need to speak with Victoria Hayes immediately." Ethan frowned. "About what?" The detective's lips pressed into a thin line. "About the fact that her accounts were emptied while she was in a coma. Someone has been moving large sums of money under her name. And if I'm right," her eyes darkened, "whoever did it doesn't want her alive." Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they weren't forming a picture he wanted to see. Someone had tried to kill Victoria. Someone had been waiting for her to never wake up. And now, that same person might still be here, hidden somewhere inside the hospital. Watching. Waiting. Ethan's heart pounded as he processed Detective Monroe's words. Someone had been draining Victoria's accounts while she was in a coma, making it look like she was handling her own financial affairs. And if they had gone to such lengths to ensure she remained unconscious, then her sudden awakening had ruined everything for them. Victoria's life was still in danger. He turned back toward the hospital room, urgency in his steps. Monroe followed closely, her expression sharp with focus. When they entered, Victoria looked between them, sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated for only a second before speaking. "Detective Monroe says someone has been moving money under your name. They thought you weren't going to wake up." Victoria's face paled. Her breathing grew uneven, and Ethan immediately stepped closer, ready to steady her if needed. But she didn't collapse, She clenched her fists, her fear quickly turning into something else. Determination. I knew something wasn't right, she murmured, her voice trembling. I just didn't know who would go this far. Monroe's gaze was steady. Do you have any idea who could have had access to your accounts? Victoria's brows furrowed as she thought, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing against the hospital blanket. Only a few people would have had the ability to do that, she said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. My financial manager, some members of my board, and Henry Caldwell. Ethan stiffened at the name. He had suspected there was something off about the so-called legal representative, but this confirmed it. Monroe, too, didn't look surprised. That name came up in our investigation, she admitted. Henry Caldwell isn't just some lawyer handling your affairs. He was appointed by a group of people who have been pulling the strings while you were in a coma. And based on the financial records we've gathered, he's the one who moved the majority of the money. Victoria's grip on the blanket tightened. He was here earlier, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He acted like he had control over my life. Like I wasn't supposed to wake up. Ethan's stomach churned. And now that she has, he's going to try to fix his mistake. Monroe gave a grim nod. Which means we need to act fast. Just as she said it, the hospital lights flickered. The sudden dimming of the room sent a wave of unease through Ethan. Then, the overhead intercom crackled. Code Gray. Security alert. Monroe's hand went to her side instinctively, where a firearm was holstered beneath her jacket. She exchanged a quick look with Ethan before stepping toward the door. I need you both to stay here, she said firmly. Lock the door if you can. I'll find out what's happening. Ethan nodded, but Victoria grabbed his wrist. Her eyes, wide and filled with something deeper than fear, held his gaze. Don't leave me alone, she whispered. He hesitated for only a second before making a decision. We're going with you, he told Monroe. If someone is here for Victoria, she's not staying in this room like an easy target. Monroe looked like she wanted to argue, but a distant sound cut her off. The sound of hurried footsteps echoing down the hall. And then, a voice. Where is she? Ethan didn't recognize it, but the venom in the words sent a chill through him. Victoria stiffened beside him. She knew that voice. Henry, she whispered. Monroe's eyes darkened. We're moving. Now. Ethan took Victoria's arm, steadying her as Monroe led them toward the back hallway. The hospital was on high alert, staff scrambling to react to the security breach. As they rounded the corner, Ethan heard the voice again, closer this time. You don't understand, Henry was saying. She's awake. She's going to ruin everything. Ethan tightened his grip on Victoria, keeping her moving. They had to get out. But just as they reached the emergency stairwell, a figure stepped into their path. Henry Caldwell. His face was flushed, his breathing uneven as he took a slow step forward. His polished, controlled demeanor was gone, replaced with something frantic, desperate. You weren't supposed to wake up, he said, his voice low. His eyes darted between Monroe and Ethan, calculating. This doesn't have to get worse. Victoria lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Worse? You tried to steal everything from me. You left me for dead. Henry's jaw tightened. You don't understand, he snapped. I didn't have a choice. If I hadn't done it, they would've. A loud voice cut through the tension. Freeze! Hospital security had arrived, weapons drawn. Henry stiffened, his hands hovering at his sides as if considering his options. And then, in a split second, he made a move, reaching for something inside his jacket. But Monroe was faster. A sharp command rang out, followed by the click of handcuffs as she swiftly disarmed and restrained him. It's over, she said coldly. You're done. Henry struggled for a moment before finally slumping in defeat. Victoria exhaled shakily, her entire body trembling. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, steadying her as she tried to process everything. "It's over," he murmured to her. "You're safe." But just as he said it, Victoria's eyes flickered with something, realization. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan frowned. "What?" Victoria looked up at him, her expression suddenly clouded with something new. Henry said, "If I hadn't done it, they would've." She swallowed hard. What if he wasn't working alone? Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. Monroe, who had been securing Henry, turned slightly at the words, her brows furrowing. And then, before anyone could speak, Monroe's radio crackled with a new transmission. "Detective, we've got another problem. The security footage. There was someone else. Someone who never left the hospital." Ethan's blood ran cold. The real threat was still out there. Ethan felt his pulse thunder in his ears. He exchanged a look with Monroe, who was already grabbing her radio, signaling for security to lock down the hospital. "There's someone else," Victoria whispered, her breath shaky. "Someone still here." Monroe gave Henry a sharp look, her patience wearing thin. "Who are you working with?" she demanded. "Who else is after Victoria?" Henry hesitated, his eyes flickering with something. Fear, regret, or maybe just the realization that he had lost. He licked his lips, then let out a breath. "You don't understand," he murmured, his voice lower now. "It was never just me. I was the face, the one handling the legal side. But they're the ones who wanted her gone." "Who?" Monroe pressed. Henry clenched his jaw. "Her board members." Victoria sucked in a breath, her fingers digging into Ethan's sleeve. "What?" Henry nodded slowly. "Not all of them, but enough. They thought you were too young, too reckless with your fortune. They were afraid you'd make changes, shift the power. When the accident happened, it was an opportunity." His eyes darkened. "They didn't put you in the coma, but once you were in it, they made sure you didn't wake up." Ethan felt sick. "The treatments," he murmured. "You weren't getting the right care." Victoria's hand trembled in his grasp. "That's why no one pushed for better specialists, why no one questioned the delays," she said softly, horror dawning on her face. "They weren't waiting for me to wake up. They were waiting for me to fade away." Monroe gritted her teeth. "Which means whoever's still in this hospital is here to finish the job." Just then, another voice crackled over Monroe's radio. "We've got movement on the east stairwell, unknown individual heading toward the ICU." Ethan's stomach turned to stone. "Victoria's room," he said. Monroe didn't hesitate. She grabbed Henry's arm, shoving him toward a pair of approaching officers. "Get him out of here," she ordered before turning to Ethan and Victoria. "Stay close to me. We're not letting them get anywhere near you." They moved quickly, weaving through the hallways as the hospital's lockdown tightened. Staff and patients were being ushered into secured areas, but whoever was after Victoria had planned this. They had found a way inside, and now they were making their move. As they approached the ICU corridor, Ethan caught sight of a figure in a hospital coat, moving fast. They had their head down, their hands tucked into the coat's deep pockets. Monroe shouted, "Stop!" The figure didn't hesitate. They bolted. Ethan felt adrenaline kick in as Monroe chased after them. He pulled Victoria behind him, keeping her close as they followed. The figure twisted through the hallway, reaching for a door handle, but Monroe was faster. She lunged, grabbing their arm and yanking them backward. The coat fell away, revealing a woman beneath it. She was in her early 50s, her blonde hair tied back in a professional bun. But the fury in her eyes was unmistakable. "Evelyn Porter," Victoria breathed, shock lacing her voice. Ethan recognized the name. She was one of the senior board members of Victoria's company, someone who had been close to her father before his passing. Evelyn's eyes darted between them, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You weren't supposed to wake up," she said, her voice eerily calm. Victoria's face hardened. You wanted me gone. Evelyn exhaled slowly, as if weighing her words. It wasn't personal, she admitted. It was about the company, about stability. Her eyes darkened. Your father built an empire. But you were too reckless, too young to handle it. Victoria's hands curled into fists. You mean too independent. You were afraid I'd change things. Evelyn didn't deny it. Your father kept things balanced. When he passed, the board was left with uncertainty. Then your accident happened, and the decision became clear. Ethan felt a surge of anger. You kept her in that coma. You tried to steal everything from her. Evelyn gave a small, cold smile. Not just me. There are others who wanted the same thing. I was just the one who made sure it happened. Monroe pulled out her cuffs. And now, you're the one who's going to prison. Evelyn didn't resist. She simply sighed, as if resigning herself to fate. Victoria watched in silence as Monroe secured her. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, just exhaustion, the weight of betrayal settling deep in her bones. Ethan touched her arm gently. It's over, he said softly. She exhaled shakily. Not yet. But soon. Monroe led Evelyn away, and hospital security eased the lockdown. The halls slowly returned to normal, but Victoria stood there for a long moment, unmoving. Ethan squeezed her hand. Are you okay? She let out a breath and nodded. I will be. In the days that followed, the truth unraveled. Henry Caldwell and Evelyn Porter were only the beginning. More names surfaced. Members of the board who had conspired to control her wealth, doctors who had been bribed to slow her recovery. The scheme was bigger than anyone had realized. But Victoria had survived. She took back control of her company, removing those who had betrayed her. She reclaimed her life, her independence. The scars remained, but they did not define her. And through it all, Ethan was there. As she stood on the balcony of her estate one evening, looking out over the city she had almost lost, she turned to him. I never thanked you, she said softly, for saving me. Ethan smiled. You saved yourself. She shook her head. I wouldn't have made it without you. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. You're here now, he said. That's what matters. She met his gaze, her lips curving into a small smile. Yes, she whispered. And I intend to stay. For the first time in a long time, she was truly awake.